Tennessee fans, considering where this program was a year ago, even 9 months ago, you got to be pretty happy with the season turned in by Josh Heupel, and now a recruiting class ranked in the top 15 in the nation. We got Charlie Burris, our guy, to talk Tennessee football. You can catch him on his podcast, A to Z Sports, Big Orange Podcast. Charlie, how's it going?
It's going very well. Glad to be back on yet again, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And a nice haul with 19 signed, already a player on campus. You're the first person I've talked to in reviewing a team where there's already a guy enrolled on campus mid-December in Jordan Phillips. Looking at this class, it's always interesting to get the take on the final rundown to National Signing Day, that final 24 to 48 hours, and what broke right, what may have broke wrong, the hits and the misses.
Yeah, it was, for the most part, I don't want to say like boilerplate, but it was what most Tennessee fans thought it would be. And thankfully, nothing negative, at least that I saw. You basically signed everybody that you had prior to early signing day. And then there were actually a couple of surprises to add on top of that, which is really nice, as you were already touching on there. You had defensive lineman Tyree West, who was a Georgia commitment. Then it was presumed he was going to go to Florida State, and then he turned away Florida State for Tennessee. That's amazing in itself right there, although Florida State certainly took their lumps yesterday, considering everything that happened. And Tennessee was not the primary person giving them the gut punches yesterday, actually. But you had Tyree West, and you had James Pierce, edge rusher, coming in kind of at the last second, where it wasn't necessarily a full-on surprise, but there were some thoughts that he would head elsewhere. And then Tennessee ended up getting him. It basically locked in that top 15 class. All things considered, just from where this program was when Josh Heupel showed up, I just don't know how you could be disappointed. Am I absolutely blown away? No, it's a top 15 class, and at Tennessee, we've seen in the not too recent past, we've seen top 5 classes. So that's, it's not absolutely incredible, but I think you have to take into consideration all of the circumstances surrounding Tennessee football. I think Heupel did a good job.
Texas, California, Florida have traditionally been the 3 richest talent states. Georgia is ascending quickly and by some accounts has overtaken California. And I see where 5 of the top 7 players on the board for Tennessee come from just south.
Yeah, this was a real point of pride with this class, I think. And it was really sort of a consolation because Heupel had a really hard time getting any of the guys from the state of Tennessee. Basically just because of timing for the most part, I think. Just a lot of those guys had already kind of made up their minds from the state of Tennessee. The one that he was fighting for in a big way was Walter Nolan, ultimately signed with Texas A&M. I mean, that kid was living in Knoxville. That's a tough one to swallow, but not necessarily getting a phone call.
You're good.
Not necessarily unexpected, I would say. And so with all of that said, it would have been nice to get a kid like that, but I'm not shocked that he didn't. And so I think the next best thing to kind of locking down the state of Tennessee is getting guys from Georgia. That's got to feel good right now. And it does as a fan and an analyst watching. I think that's awesome. But I think it's going to take time to get back into the state of Tennessee. So supposedly the story around that kind of is that Jeremy Pruitt really burned a lot of bridges there in a pretty bad way. And so it might take Heupel a decent amount of time to build all of that back and be able to get Tennessee back in the door in some of these places. And so with that being the case, him being able to go into Georgia, your top 2 recruits, guys from Georgia, you said, was it four out of the top
5 of the top 7?
5 of the top 7? Yeah, right there. It says it all that he was able to salvage the class with guys from a state that currently has one of the best teams in America, just right there, And so again, on the whole, you look at what he was up against coming in, and this effort's pretty impressive.
Got Charlie Burris on the line. You can catch him on his podcast, A to Z Sports, Big Orange Podcast. And, of course, follow on Twitter as well, as Tennessee brings in the top 15 class number 6 in the SEC, according to the 247 Sports rankings. This next question certainly would fall into the category of you just go to the top of the board and see who the best players are in terms of recruiting ranking, at least talent evaluation to answer this question. But just based on your own reading and research, huddle tapes you've watched, whatever your resources are, some guys that you'd like to highlight that may not necessarily be at the top of the board that you find as pretty intriguing prospects.
It's a great question. The obvious ones are the guys that were the hallmarks in this class, those being Tyree West, as we already mentioned, Taven Jackson, quarterback out of Indiana, 4-star guy who I think fits incredibly into Heupel's system. And you just watch that tape and you compare it to what Heupel was running this year with Hendon Hooker. I think he slots right in really nicely, and that's great. Those are the really notable guys. Another one being Justin Williams, running back that Tennessee, they had to fight off Auburn right at the end. Auburn made a really strong push for that kid, and ultimately Heupel locked him down. He looks great on film, and that's a position where it sounds strange because Tennessee was pretty strong running the ball this year, but they're losing Tyon Evans, who was kind of their star back, and so I think you need more guys like this. And he fits in really nicely. But down the list, I mean, I just look at some of these guys that you might not hear a lot about. Like this one, I think, is notable, if for nothing else, that his nickname, Markquarius White, but he goes by Squirrel White. And I like a guy like that. He's kind of buried down in the class, if that's the way that you want to say it. But I think that he is a guy that could just kind of pop up and really be a great asset in the Tennessee offense, just because Heupel spreads the ball out so much on offense. He just goes to 15 different options. And so you could get a guy like that who can come in and probably contribute immediately. You had young guys contributing this season, and your Velus Jones is moving on. And a couple of other guys are too. So you got opportunities right there. And some of these young guys like this, per se, they step up in camp. I think could contribute fairly immediately. And so I like to see that. But on the whole, most of the highlights, I would say, are on offense. The defensive haul in this class was good, but they're not the super flashy guys. They're definitely going to be guys that are going to have to be developed. And especially on the defensive line, Tennessee has Rodney Garner at the defensive line, who's a stalwart coach and really a big time stalwart recruiting guy in the SEC. And he did a really good job in this recruiting class. But you're going to have to rely on those coaches to develop these guys. They're 3-stars for the most part, and kind of buried down the list in terms of like top 247 sports players or anybody or anything like that. So I think they can be immediate contributors, but I'm not sure exactly who that would be. I mean, Tennessee certainly on defense has the chance to have some immediate, some guys immediately help. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of just pinpointing one guy that I just go like, yep, it's going to be that guy. You look at Tyree West. That's just the easy answer. Highest rated guy in the entire class. Kind of goes without saying. But beyond that, it's going to kind of be a crapshoot to just see who takes the lead and works the hardest and gets on the field.
Well, any player with the nickname Squirrel, if he's going to make it in college football, you would think Josh Heupel's offense would be the place for him to be.
I really hope that he does, because I want to talk about Squirrel White. I can tell you that much. Such a great name.
With the expansion of the number of bowl games played each and every year, with the playoff, with the opt-outs, there is a negative attitude among some fan bases and population of the college football fan base that have a negative outlook on bowl games. So how is the Tennessee fan base taking this assignment against Purdue in the Music City Bowl?
on a baseline, excited to be back in a bowl game. I think that's a given. Would we have liked a different game rather than just going to Nashville? Yeah, I mean, I think so. Because it just is a game that Tennessee has played in a million times at this point. You go back, played in the Music City Bowl in 2016. You played the Music City Bowl in 2012. Obviously, it's Nashville and it's in Titan Stadium. You played in Titan Stadium against Bowling Green in 2015. I mean, it's just a place where you've played a lot of football if you're the Tennessee football program.
When you think bowl trips, you think you're actually taking a trip to another location, and it's new and it's exciting, and yes, it's an experience.
A lot of Tennessee fans are going to take a 15-minute drive to that bowl game, and so as great as that is, I think it's going to be a sellout. You actually had, it was kind of funny in this last week, you had Purdue fans complaining because Tennessee fans were purposefully buying up their allotment of tickets. I mean, that's just the way Tennessee rolls. If you give us the chance to go to a bowl game in the state of Tennessee, that's what it is. So that it's going to be fun, and it's going to be a sellout for Tennessee fans, and it's going to be a great weekend hanging out in Nashville. But I just think you had some options floating out there, like the Gator Bowl against Wisconsin, the Outback Bowl against Penn State, and you just look at those and you go, man, that would have been way more exciting. Man, that would have been great. Because also Purdue, their two best players are sitting out, the wide receiver, Bell.
Yeah.
And another defensive guy who's one of their best guys sitting out.
It must be George Karlaftis, their defensive end. He's going to be like a first-round NFL draft pick. Yeah, those two guys are phenomenal. Yeah.
And they're both taking the bowl game off. So you look at that matchup, Tennessee's probably going to be 3 to 9.5 point favorite, somewhere in there, depending on how Vegas is feeling, I got to imagine. And so all of that considered, it's great to be back in a bowl game. I cannot complain about a 7-win season. This season has gone better than I thought that it would. I actually do think in preseason I predicted a 7-win season, but I predicted a 7-win season that included a win over Pittsburgh and more losses in the SEC. And I will say, after having experienced it, I certainly prefer more wins in the SEC, especially a great win against a really solid Kentucky team that kind of solidified a really nice season for Josh Heupel this year. And so all things considered, so happy to be back. Always nice to be back in a bowl game, especially when you're in the position that Tennessee is in. But I'd rather be playing in the Outback Bowl, sure. I'm not going to lie to you about that.
Tennessee opened as a 2.5 point underdog, and that has gone all the way over to now as a 4-point favorite, probably due to those two opt-outs.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I hadn't looked at the early line on it because, I mean, Purdue, what, they 8-4?
Purdue's pretty good football team.
Yeah,
8-4, beat Michigan State, beat Iowa.
But Tennessee historically in bowl games has absolutely handed it the Big Ten teams. I believe in the last 4, they are 4-0, and 2 of those were total blowouts against Northwestern and Nebraska. Or Northwestern and Iowa, somewhat close against Nebraska, and then you had one of the wildest comebacks I've ever watched the Tennessee team have against Indiana, where you recovered an onside kick and ended up winning at the last second. But so the history against Big Ten teams in bowl games is good for Tennessee. So history is on our side. That doesn't mean a whole lot about this season. But I think, to me, 4 points is about right. What did I say? It's between 3 and 9.5, I would expect. And Tennessee probably can't get up that high, although I would analyze that bowl game this way. If Purdue lets it get out of hand, it's going to get out of hand. Because it has impressed me this season, the way Tennessee can run up the score on teams, because it snowballs so quickly. If Tennessee scores like the way they did against Kentucky, who's one of the better teams in the SEC this year, 45 points in that game on 13.5 minutes of possession. I mean, it is just absolutely breakneck, and those points add up really quick if you don't respond with scores in kind to Tennessee. So I think 4 is about right, but if Tennessee gets going and it becomes clear they're going to run away with it, I think they might win by 20. And maybe we're being way too confident just because these players are sitting out and Tennessee's going to lose. I don't. That's bowl games are weird. Let's not forget about that. But doesn't everybody always kind of considers the motivations? I guess I feel like Tennessee's going to be motivated in this game. Not that Purdue won't be. I think Purdue probably always has an appreciation for bowl games, but
I don't think there's a gap in motivation, or at least conjecturing or projecting motivation. It's not like somebody slipped out of a college football playoff or those type of expectations and are landing in a Music City Bowl. I would think that both teams would be motivated.
I think they will be, and I'm interested to see how it goes. I think my desire is for it to just be a total blowout and be just this really fun thing. I'm gonna be you've already said it here. I do a game day show with former Tennessee quarterback Jonathan Crompton. We do a show at halftime and post game, and we might actually be doing something different for this game for anybody who watches our show and might be listening to this. Ideally, announcement hopefully coming soon on that. But for my own sanity, it's tough to kind of do that show per se if Tennessee loses. It's tough to get your mind right if it's like a really close game that kind of frays your nerves. So I would like to just have a nice, what is it, December 30th, I think that game is, day before New Year's Day. We just have a nice, easy, relaxing time sticking it to Purdue. That would be great. But it's probably going to be close. Hopefully a double-digit win for Tennessee, best case scenario. But looking at it realistically, I'll give it to Tennessee in a close one.
Charlie Burris, there it is, right there on the banner. That's where you can follow him to his podcast, A to Z Sports, Big Orange Podcast. Charlie, always appreciate you stopping by, laying down the knowledge on the Vols.
Absolutely. As always, love coming on, Mark.